Have you ever had a client that's stuck in a painful emotion, unable to shift? Well, that's because of something called a Vaded ego state. A part of them carrying unresolved pain has actually taken control. But what if you could bring that state forward and resolve it in the moment? Well, in this video, we're going to show you exactly how to recognize and work with Vaded ego states, and that way you can create some deep, lasting change for your clients. All right, let's get into it. Mike Mandel's here in the studio.
Well, let's, first of all, as your wizard, let's just define what is a Vaded ego state. And those of you who've done any sort of study with us recognize that ego states are sub-personalities. They're the same as NLP parts. Gordon Emerson calls them resource states. They are parts of you. Each one of them is you, and you're listening in an ego state right now. Most of our ego states tend to be pretty functional and healthy, which is what we want. But there are Vaded ego states too. And Vaded is a coined term that Dr. Emerson came up with. It's short for invaded. Invaded by what? And it's fear, anger, sadness, trauma. Think of the word fast. Everything falls into that. You have a horrible car accident you cannot get over. We had a friend with that 2 years. That's trauma. That's the T in it. Sadness, grief would fit into that as well. Anxiety will fit into these things. Anger, blowing up at people. All these things that
all the bad emotions.
All the bad emotions fit into the FAST acronym. Now, the key is when a Vaded ego state, or indeed any ego state, becomes executive, what does that mean? Executive means it is not just some imaginary psychological thing like a placebo effect, but it is neurologically linked through neural pathways, axons and dendrites, right to, I think it's your front right brain here, which is where executive function is. That means that ego state is running the show. So you're listening in an ego state right now that's executive, and if it leaves the executive, another one will jump in. And this is always happening with one at any given waking moment being executive and in charge.
So you can think of it like a little software program that's in charge of you at the moment, and that software program is actually a part of your brain. It's a bunch of neural pathways, and when one becomes executive, say the one that's scared of the dark, or whatever, then you're going to respond with that program running and basically taking over your brain.
Yes, and this is a fine and important point that we've looked at many times, and some therapies, a lot of trainings completely miss the point. An ego state that is Vaded, you can't just fix it unless it's executive.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's in the background just watching.
Right. Now, you've always said that these executive states, they just happen, right? They happen organically in life. So a Vaded state may take the executive
because it's triggered.
Because it's triggered by something.
Right.
And okay, so talk about that, because that's how we deal with it.
For sure. Anytime something is triggered with a word, something that's thought of, something that's seen, it doesn't matter what it is. Every time the person is triggered, whether it's a racial slur or fear of something, a spider, anything, it is always a Vaded ego state that has been triggered and immediately become executive. So in other words, you've not had to call it to the executive. It has shown up organically just based on what's going on in the environment around you.
Okay, perfect. So what's next?
Well, you have to be calibrating to even see this happen.
All right.
And ego states give cues and clues all the time. So if you're talking to your client and something comes up in the conversation and you notice this external shift, their mood might seem to change.
They went somewhere else.
Yes, went somewhere else. They're in a trance when they go somewhere else. They might look away and you might see a frown, or their breathing can shift with a big sigh. Their posture can change. It can collapse instead of being upright. Their facial expression, even the tone and the speed of their voice can indicate another ego state has taken over the executive. If someone is talking, they're all quiet and everything, and you mention something about your uncle, and the person's voice suddenly changes. Well, what I think in that situation, you've now got an ego state executive that has a problem with the uncle, and you can hear the shift.
Okay, so bottom line is we're looking for change. We're calibrating to look for change, and that's usually the signal that a different ego state is now in the executive.
Right, and if it's exhibiting fear, anger, sadness, trauma, irritation, any of these things, it is a Vaded ego state. Now, the key is you want to keep it there in order to help it. So you say to the person, what is that emotion you're feeling right now? Now, when you say you're feeling, it's asking the ego state that is executive.
Right.
It's the one listening. And it might say discomfort, or it might say sadness. Whatever they say, note it, because they will give you the right word that will trigger this state in their amygdala. Don't make up the word for them, and you're going to keep the ego state executive by using that word they give you as though it was their name. So the person says anxiety, you'll say, okay, anxiety, tell me about by using that word, the ego state will stay there.
Right. Okay. So
And
that's the whole point of asking, like, what are you feeling right now?
Right. And now this is the perfect time to treat that ego state. Because remember, if it is not executive and it's a Vaded state, it's watching. It's not getting the treatment. It's like you need help with a phobia. And so you make the appointment with a therapist, but you're busy that day, so you send your sister to the appointment for you, and she comes home and you still got a freaking phobia because you weren't executive in the moment. So there's different ways of treating this, all kinds of NLP methods. If something shows up when I'm working with someone, Chris, I would immediately go to my 6-step tapping.
Okay, so we'll make sure that we put up a separate video on how to do 6-step tapping. You've in fact used that to cure your own fibromyalgia years ago. Maybe that's the video we'll link to, I'm not sure. But 6-step tapping, just a really quick way, as long as that state is in the executive, you can take those subjective units of distress and always aim for 0. Get them from wherever they are down to aim for 0.
Sure, and it's once I've asked, well, what is that emotion, that feeling you have right now, that negative feeling, that bad feeling? The person says anxiety. I will say, how bad is it out of 10 right now? With 10 being out of control and 0 being none. Well, it's about a 6. Okay, it's about a 6. Anxiety is about a 6. I'm still using the word they've given me. And I'll say, now do the 6-step, and I won't go through the whole thing, but I'll say the word, anxiety, the word they've just given me. Get rid of the anxiety, and so on. Go through the 6 steps. I'll have them breathe, relax, say peace, and I'll say, okay, now try as hard as you can to get that feeling back. Now, the trying makes it harder. I'm going to see what the number is, and all I'm going to do is keep repeating until it zeroes out.
Right.
And that's the point.
And the same will be true for whatever the intervention is. So I know obviously this is not a video that is in-depth on Mike Mandel's 6-step tapping method, nor will it be an in-depth video on breathing shifts or what we call ADAC or ideomotor signals or any other interventions. But let's just briefly touch on what are some of the interventions that any well-trained hypnotist in the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy should have in their toolbox.
Well, I've got, ideomotor work as part of this, but ideomotor is really as a check. You can check to see if it's completely cleared with finger signals, and that's a useful thing. That would be more at the end of the session. But any kind of breathing shift, we're looking at Dr. John Grinder's chain of excellence here. You're changing the breathing, shifting it to deeper abdominal, slower, more relaxed breathing. You're switching on parasympathetic nervous system. It's going to immediately give you a physiological shift with the subject, which will change their state, which will change what's going to happen in this performance of whatever is being triggered. So breathing shifts, and as you breathe and feel so much more powerful, notice how that number that was 6 out of 10 is dropping like a stone.
Yeah.
That's right. You're layering in suggestion as you're doing this. And note that any of these can be done in a trance or external to a trance, but we say hypnosis is an amplifier of human experience, so we'd always rather have it done with some degree of trance.
And if you're doing this in trance, then whatever the intervention is, it always makes sense to cement those changes, as we often say, with direct suggestion in hypnosis, DSIH. We'll make sure we link to a video on DSIH as well.
Now, after you've thrown any of the tools that we teach in MMHA at the problem and calibrate that it is gone, you are always going to end by future pacing. Now, what does that mean? You're going to say, so when you see that spider next time, what will happen? And I want to calibrate as I ask that. If the person goes, oh, you've still got work to do.
Yeah, exactly.
As what was the guy in our last training?
Maurizio.
Yeah, he was great. Just goes, like, just dismiss it.
Yeah, you did this gesture of like,
spider.
Creepy crawly spider, because that's what he had started with. And you did the end, he was like,
just dismiss it. 100%. That's great.
Yeah.
Check your work. Remember, some therapists are afraid to check their work. Why? Because they're afraid it didn't work. We tell you always check your work. It's better to find out it didn't work when they're still in the session.
Yeah, imagine a mechanic, mechanic sort of fixing cars, and all the clients are, off not very happy with their results. Do you think they're going to refer people to you? Probably not. So check your work, make sure you did a good job. Now, with that said, if you want to learn more about hypnosis and how to make change work happen and learn it based on principles, not having to read scripts of people and thinking that there are magical words, come to the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy, MikeMandelHypnosis.com. You can start. There's free ways to get started, and oh man, it's fantastic. It's life-changing for a lot of people. So
yes, it is.
Here's wow, what an impressive call to action, guys. But I admit it, so it's okay. All right, we'll see you in the next video, guys.
Yes, we will.
Thanks again, and good night.